YouTube? I'm Ashling, and today we are going to be talking about how to homebrew races in your game for D&D 5th edition. Just so you know, this was streamed live on Twitch, so don't forget to check me out there, and I hope you enjoy. Now let's get into it. So, first up is... what is a race in D&D 5e? So a race, sometimes referred to as a species, is the physical characteristics of a bloodline that your character hails from. So this can be something that exists in real life or something fantastical such as an elf or a plasmoid. Nowadays, they're also shifting, so a lot of TTRPGs, not just D&D, will refer to races as lineages or heritages as well. And, you know, this may change a little bit with the upcoming 1 D&D rules. However, it's still very much fluctuating, so we'll see how that goes when that happens. It's going to be backwards compatible, so hopefully this will still be usable in the near future. So yeah, basically, your character does not have to be defined by their race, but sometimes they are. Some races have more impact on your character than others do. They do offer mechanical benefits, but we're gonna get into that here in a little bit as well. So yeah, let's move to the next slide. So the types of races in D&D 5e. So we're gonna go over kind of the theme and general mechanics here. So they're gonna be
Movies!
I forgot to turn the alerts off. Sayin, thank you so much for the boobies and the 100 bits. Wow, hope you enjoyed that one, YouTube. I maybe did, so I'm, let me just, fuck. Okay, well, the volume is now on 0, so you can't hear it if it's played. Cool. Sounds good. Oopsie doopsie. Anyway, I forgot. So anyway, types of races for D&D 5e. So you have your standard races, which are going to be just overall things, like elves, humans, plasmoids, anything that is just a base race on its own. And then you have sub-races, which are going to be subcategories or variations of the base race. And then you also have racial variants. So these are, while similar to sub-races, they generally have more mechanical and physical differences than a sub-race. So between sub-races and variants, it can get a little bit tricky on like which one you want to make, and it all kind of depends on what you want to do. But to be honest, a lot of the time they're very similar, but the way I just like to look at it is racial variants may tend to come from a different place, or they just have they're further away from the base race than a sub race would be, and we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. And then we also have lineages, and lineages are kind of a different beast, and we will also talk about them a little bit later some more. Lineage... So, lineages, yeah, they're a whole other shebang. We'll get into them. They're more of a newer addition to D&D. They came around with Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, as well as Tasha's, so we'll get into those. So yeah, next up, let's see. So, do or should races matter for actually storytelling in your D&D game? So this actually really depends on the kind of game that you want to play. A lot of, if you're playing a min-max game, and, you know, you're playing with a bunch of people that just like combat, probably won't matter as much. You're probably going to pick your race for the mechanical benefits rather than the actual combat benefits. But if you're, if you're someone that really likes playing really deep characters that have a lot of reason, then, maybe their race could factor into that. So some races do have story hooks built into them. A great example, I'm going to be honest, today we're going to talk about a lot about tieflings just because they have great variation and great examples of kind of everything that I'm going to talk about. So that's one of the easiest races to just, bring up. But tieflings are a good reason, even though their story hook may be overdone of, they were chased out of town. People didn't like them because of, the way they looked or because of their heritage. That's a great adventuring hook compared to like a furbolg who literally they are very reclusive and they don't like to leave the forests. So it may be harder for a player to pick furbolg as their race compared to tiefling because tieflings are natural adventurers versus furbolgs who are like naturally more reclusive. So it very much depends. There are races, a lot of great races with amazing adventure plot hooks already if you want that to really matter. But even though you could also flip it and you could be like, oh, well, if you want to play furbolg, I'm different, or I have a specific reason in my backstory that's not tied to my race for adventuring. So it really all depends. There is no right or wrong answer here. It's just, how should I put this? It's really all in what you want to do as a player and, when communicating with your DM. So a race choice can be for mechanical or storytelling benefits, and that's kind of just what I said. It's up to the DM and player to decide. If you want to play a race that is like doesn't necessarily fit or make sense for your character, there's always exceptions to like the rule in every circumstance. I'm gonna say that a lot in this lecture. But say if you really wanted to play, I don't know, what's a good one to pull here? If you wanted to play a Thri-kreen because they have 4 arms, right? And you were playing, let's see, Oath of Devotion Paladin, you're devoted to a deity. That's like, and this deity just hates Thri-kreen for whatever reason. That could be a really interesting concept because of your chosen race. And, you chose it for the mechanical benefits, but now you're already getting a story aspect out of that if you decide to go in a direction like that. So or if you're just like, I like the plasmoids because they can get really, really small and fit into tight places. That works too. So your race does not always have to be tied to storytelling. You could just be an elf, or you could just be like a human. It doesn't, but, the way I like to think of it, I like to have races, potentially have an impact on my character, but I don't want to overdo it. You also don't want to be the edgelord tiefling in the back that's like, everyone fucking hates me. I'm such an outcast, blah, 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 just because they're a tiefling. Like, that doesn't make sense. A lot of the time, sometimes it might, but there's probably other reasons for that potentially, you perceive that most other people hate you off the bat. So like, why, like what other factors are there to that than just your race? So it really depends. Just absolutely, yes, they can matter, but they also don't have to matter. It's up to you and your DM. So now we're going to talk a little bit about mechanics here. So fun. I love mechanics. So after your class choice and your stat spread, your race has the most impact on the mechanics of your character and, oh, what the heck? That was weird. And how they may play at the table. So your stats that you roll, and then generally your racial you'll get a statistical racial bonus and that will be the only way you can add to your stats until like level 4, where you get an ASI or a feat, in a general sense. So for the majority, like since Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, now you can just have any race essentially either get a +1/+2 or a +1/+1/+1. There are always exceptions. There are 2 races that you can get a +4 to your stats, a dwarf sub-race and then half-elf. But generally, the vast majority of races, this is how it's going to be. And I think this is a great balanced way to do it. So I think this is also something to consider when you're homebrewing races. So when you're homebrewing, you're most likely going to want to keep this. You don't want to give, you know, a character like, oh my gosh, they get like a +5 and they're like such a giga. That's not, you know, going to keep the balance of the game. Unless everyone at your table's okay with that and that's something you want to do. But generally, I would let whatever your players want. If you're homebrewing it or they're homebrewing it, whatever, I would just have the +1/+2 and the +1/+1/+1, and then they can choose between those two, depending on, you know, what their stats are or what they want to do. And then a good rule for the majority of races and their abilities, this is generally what I tend to go by, is 1 to 2 mechanical abilities. So these are abilities that are going to very much benefit them in combat or in like actual, you know, situations that'll make them stronger, versus 1 to 2 more roleplay based abilities or flavor abilities, which are kind of like, these are fun, awesome flavor things that you get because you are, you know, this race, and it gives you more special quirks to feel unique. So in total, I like to say 2 to 4 abilities, and this number can depend on a couple of factors. Say if it's a sub-race or a racial variant, the reasons that they have these abilities, and then power and level balancing. So Custom Lineage is a great example of this, where Custom Lineage really does not get a lot of abilities, but that's because they get a free feat at level 1, which is way stronger than most abilities that, you know, races are going to get overall as a whole. So generally, you kind of just want to keep that in mind. One of my biggest tips is just look at other races for inspiration, and see like, okay, well, this race is, I've played this race, I really like it, it's pretty good, but I want to do something different. So maybe I want similar abilities, but I don't want the same thing. So a good example is a decent amount of races get spells. If you give the race that you're creating spells, just leave the same amount of spells, but just change the actual spell. Don't give them like, you know, a 3rd level spell at level 1 and be like, haha, my race can cast fireball. Oh my goodness, because I'm like a god tier kitsune. No, stop. That's not, you're gonna break the game. If you want to break it, that's just, you know, just make sure everyone at your table's okay with it, but like that's not balanced or fair in most situations. So yeah. So now we are going to talk about lineages some more. They're a new addition to the game. And so they're lineages from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft and the custom lineage. So custom lineage is similar to variant human because those are the only 2 races that grant you a feat at level 1. And it allows you to look like any race. So currently, it's the simplest way to create / customize your own race. So basically what you can do is say, oh, I want to play a deer person, but the deer person isn't in the book and I don't really have the time or want to homebrew. Just ask your DM if you can play custom lineage and then pick a feat that will help you feel more like a deer person, and then you can just look like a deer person. And that's, you know, that's that. It's definitely the simplest way to go about customizing a race as it stands right now. So Van Richten's lineages can be chosen at character creation, or they can be something that happens to your character later on. Currently, there are 3 lineages for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, those being the Hexblood, the Reborn, and the Dampire. And they basically overwrite most of your racial abilities. And they are a little bit, they are a little bit more powerful than your average race, in my personal opinion. But they also have a lot of flavor and things like that, and they are designed for a specific setting. But what's really interesting is that it can be something that happens to your character. So if you start out as a dwarf, at level 7, say you're bitten by a vampire and then you become a dwarf dampire, some of your things will stay the same, but most of your stuff is going to change and adapt now because of an event that happened to you. And I think that's a really awesome concept. But so lineages in D&D 5e are not actually, they are races, but they're additions to races that you can choose at character creation as long as your DM is okay with it. But they're a little bit different. That's why they're a little bit wonky, and it's even different from custom lineage as well. So, just let your DM know if you do want something like this to do something like this or anything. So, yeah, exactly. They're all over the place, but they are powerful, and they offer even more customization than just going with a standard race, in my opinion. So that's why I like them, because they're very customizable without you having to personally homebrew anything. So, yeah. Homebrewing, variants, and subraces. Here we are. So, almost pulled my thing out. Anyway, so this is how I like to do it in my personal opinion, and we are going to take a look at some subraces and variants later on, and I'm going to show you guys some good examples of ones that are currently in the game. So that way you guys can get an idea when you try and do this on your own. So subraces for D&D have generally the fewest changes. A good example of this are the subrace changes for all of the legacy tieflings. They're technically legacy content, but you can still absolutely use them in your 5e games. A lot of them really are just, they change, I believe it was, some of the horn shapes, and then really just the spells that they got to flavor it more towards the whatever plane of the hells they were from. There's going to be exceptions to every rule, because I would argue as well that elves, which they are doing this a little bit differently now, but a lot of the elf subraces can be closer to variants, but now a lot of the more out there elf subraces are now base races that are considered elves instead of variants or subraces, so they have very different abilities. But like, say if you take a wood elf and a high elf, they're going to be very similar except for a few small abilities and physical differences. So yeah, for homebrewing you want small but minimal changes, i.e. changing their spells, changing the type of damage that race may be resisted to, or changing like a skin color or a physical feature change. That's not too dramatic, like maybe the shape of, an elf's ears. Like, see, my ears are like, they have 1 point, but if you have, I don't know, moon elves and they have like dual pointed ears, something like that. So it's like noticeable, but it's not extreme or drastic. So variants generally have more changes, but they're still like a recognizable member of that race. So we are going to use the tieflings again, but if you look at the feral variant tieflings, in the book, it very much describes that these tieflings look more feral, like they have longer nails, their tails may be thicker, their tails may be spiked, their horns are larger, they have more fangs. They still look like tieflings, but there are much more visible and different changes when comparing it to a subrace. It's not just skin tone. There's lots of changes, but you can still recognize them as a member of that race. So generally, for variants, I would say at least around like 3 changes, kind of where I listed them, for the sub races. So maybe like 3 physical changes that aren't, they're drastic, but they're not, you can still tell it's a, you know, someone of that race. And then changing their actual features that you're giving them more than just the sub race. So you want probably 2 to 3 changes of the abilities, where you might not, you know, you could change a lot of the abilities, but maybe not all of them. For tieflings, every tiefling is going to have resistance to fire damage, and that's something that's consistent. So you may not want to change that if you're playing, you know, a variant. That's going to be extremely different. But if you're playing maybe a tiefling subrace, a great example of this is Jester from Critical Role. Jester didn't have resistance to fire damage. She had resistance to cold damage. However, and she had blue skin. But other than that, almost every other feature about her was extremely similar to just a basic tiefling. So she would be a great example of, maybe a more of a homebrew subrace versus a variant. Where if instead Jester had, we'll say, resistance to fire damage still, but she still had blue skin, her horns were way larger than the average size tiefling, and, you know, her tail was extremely short, and she had, 3 arms, you know, something where it's like, oh, like, I think that's a tiefling, but that looks a little weird, bro. Like, that's more than your normal. There's something else going on there, you know? So it's more different. It's like a scale, right? It goes base race, sub race, variant. That's kind of how I like to think of it. Sub races and variants are kind of confusing. I think it should just maybe all be, it's a little weird, but that's how I see it in my brain. So I hope that helps you guys kind of understand it a bit more. So yeah. But that's why I would just keep for variants, because they're still part of that same base race at the end of the day. If there's something that's integral to like the actual story or narrative of that race that people know, that's like, if you're that person, if you're a member of that race, then you have those things, then I would generally try and keep that even in a variant. So I think a good example of this would be elves with pointed ears. You're not really gonna see an elf unless their ears have been gruesomely like chopped off. Most of the time you're not gonna see an elf with like rounded ears. Their points may be duller or sharper depending, but they're probably still gonna have pointed ears at the end of the day if they are an elf. In most general fantasy settings, that's not always true, just as an example that hopefully most people can relate to. So next, we're actually going to talk about homebrewing a race from scratch. So I like to essentially start with a theme for the race first and foremost. I think a really good, if you're trying to really learn how to do this and get good at it, just picking an animal is generally an easy one, because animals can be very distinct a lot of the time, and they can have unique abilities that can kind of be transferred into D&D in mechanical ways. So I think that's pretty fun. So why does this race exist in your world? So what is their, like, what purpose do they serve? Why do they exist? Like, say if you have, we were talking about deer people earlier. If you have deer people in your world, why do they exist? Like, is it just because it was a natural human mutation? Is it because there was something magical that like, what is the reason that these people came about? Were they just created by the gods like a lot of other races? Because it can be as simple as that. And I also say, as a general rule of thumb, try to come up with at least one natural story hook for this race. So we did talk about tieflings earlier, and then, you know, them being kind of outcast of society. But that's also why like half elves make really good adventurers, because they can be nomads or diplomats and interact with a lot of people, but they feel like they don't have a home themselves, so they're kind of pushed and travel from place to place to place, which makes sense for an adventurer. So like, you don't have to make your race like, say there's going to be different examples of this. If this is a race that's highly populated, populates a lot of, you know, your world, like humans or elves, you are going to have very much people that are adventurers and people that aren't. But if it's a rarer race and something that's not as common, it's much easier to make them naturally prone to adventure and come up with a hook as to why that is. Because if you have, I don't know, mer people, but they can't breathe outside of the water, that might not be the best for adventuring. Or if you have, you know, people that are very much tied to their tribe and they don't like to leave and it's all about while you can make that work, it's not going to be easy. That is definitely more of a challenge, both for the DM and the player. So if you're creating something from scratch, it just makes sense to give the race itself a natural adventuring hook. Like I said, you don't have to, but this just makes it easier for players to also want to play and choose this race. Because a lot of the time too, it may make coming up with backstories a little bit easier. So mechanically, talked about this a little bit as well earlier, but this came about with Tasha's. I think it's the easiest and simplest way to go about balancing the stats for your races. Just allow your players to pick either a +2 or +1 to any stat, or a +1/+1/+1 to any of their stats to keep things balanced. If you would like to, this is what I like to do when I create races, is to recommend a stat that fits the race. So to give a general overview, so say generally if you are a deer person, you may have a +2 to dexterity and a +1 to wisdom. However, you can choose where you put your stats to give this helps to give your like players an idea of what this race might be like as well. And we talked about the 2 to 4 abilities. So 1 to 2 roleplay and 1 to 2 combat. General rule, things can vary, especially depending on the power level of the abilities, but I really wouldn't go outside and give a race more than 4 abilities, other than potentially, you know, the ones that every race is going to have, i.e. being movement speed and the stats, and really that's it, because technically even dark vision counts as an ability. While most races have dark vision, why does your race have dark vision? Like, don't just give the race dark vision because everyone has dark vision. Not all races do have dark vision. And, you know, think about, because it might not be a powerful ability. Maybe if you give your race dark vision, they have 3 other abilities that are a little bit stronger just because they have dark vision. Comparatively, as to having four abilities that aren't dark vision. Because at least in my personal experience, what I've noticed, a lot of the races that may have dark vision actually have less stronger abilities because of dark vision. So, yeah. And I would also, really one of my biggest things is take inspiration from races that already exist and are published and balanced in the game. Even if you want to have a race that is stronger than average, there are already stronger than average races in the game. And take inspiration from them. So that way you know, like, if you're going too overboard. Look at the amount of abilities they have, look at what they do, and things like that. So one race that I think is really, really good is the new Bugbear that came out, I think, in Mordenkainen's. Bugbear used to be kind of mid, but now Bugbear's it's a phenomenal race. It's very powerful, and they have really cool, unique abilities. but it's still managed, like it's a strong race, but at the same time it's still not game breaking. So there's also a difference between having a game breaking and a strong race. And if you want to give your race a feat, to be honest, I would just go custom lineage and just base it off of custom lineage, because it's already kind of laid out for you and set up, so that way in a way it'll still be balanced. But if you want to create something that is special and from scratch, that doesn't utilize like a feat, I would recommend really just taking inspiration from other races. You guys, I'm gonna show you a race that I've been working on here, that I've made from scratch, and then you'll really see like kind of what I'm talking about, and hopefully you know, I don't get too flamed in the fucking comments for it. I'm no expert by any means, but I've been playing for a while. I've made a couple races and sub races, and I think it's something that people ask a lot of questions about and they're interested in, even if there's 85,000 race choices already. But you know, people want to play things like Kitsune, and instead of just reflavoring Tabaxi, which is what I would recommend if you want to play Kitsune, is just reflavor the Tabaxi to be a, you know, normal person with just cat ears and a tail. But hey, what do I know? And I do want to say, creating a dynamic and interesting race that really feels alive and interactive with your world can take time, so don't rush it. Unless you are under a deadline, then that sucks to suck, Buttercup. But especially if you want to like kind of, if whether you are using a pre-established world or you are using your own world, don't rush it. Just take your time and do, you know, play around with it. Just talk to your players as well and be like, hey, I really want to try this thing. Like, I want to have this cool race of dolphin people, and you know, they like give them the lore. But like, also don't be afraid to be like, hey, I don't know that this is working. I think I might change this about these. And say if one of your players is playing a dolphin person, and you know, they might be cool with it, they may not, but most of the time it's just all about communication. Communication is key in Dungeons and Dragons. It is essential. You cannot have fun playing the game without communication unless you're an absolute psychopath. So, yeah. Whoa, final tips and takeaways. We'll look at all the race stuff after, but try to keep it simple, to keep it balanced. All right? This is a great saying that I like from Pointy Hat, but keep it simple, stupid. There we go. Take inspo from other races. You don't have to copy them, but definitely take inspiration. Keep in mind the story you're trying to tell with you and your friends. And have fun and do what works for you and your table. Woo! So, we're actually going to take a look now at a race that I have homebrewed and hopefully don't embarrass myself too much on the internet. Anyway, so yeah. Oh, nope. I'm trying to like zoom in. I don't know that it's working. Anyway, this race is now public. It's on D&D Beyond, so anyone can view it if you would like to view it. Or save it or use it, whatever. I will say, I did make this one stream, but since that stream, I have gone back and made a few changes, so we're gonna look at it. So, generally, Astral Tieflings are not born, but made. They come from experimentation on humanoids in the Astral Sea, or from making a deal with the things that lurk in the far realms. While not directly of infernal heritage, the creation of these beings is still connected to tainted bloodlines and pacts. Astral Tieflings tend to have horns and a tail, making it simpler for the common folk to just label them as Tieflings. Humanoids can also become Astral Tieflings of their own accord if they spend too much time in the Astral Sea, if they have a high enough intelligence. Astral Tieflings are quite rare and generally don't have a specific culture due to how they are created. One may go their entire life without seeing one. They have psychic powers granted to them by their twisted connection to the astral planes and far realms. Astral Tieflings tend to keep to themselves or are incredibly outgoing because of the isolationist nature of the Astral Sea. they tend to be at one extreme of the emotional spectrum, not generally in the middle. They can be incredibly docile or aggressive as well, depending on how the astral tiefling was created. So generally, astral tieflings are well-traveled or were initially denizens of the astral planes themselves. Some seek this fate, others did not and feel it as a curse. Astral tieflings are incredibly curious by nature and have a thirst for knowledge. They are generally seen as exotic or just rare tiefling variations when traveling to other planes of existence. Astral tieflings usually have neutral or cool-toned skin, as well as sharp nails and nodes at the end of their horns. The horns have a slight magnetic pull to them, and their horns or tails may be embedded with metal. So what I kind of tried to do with this description was kind of give natural adventuring hooks. There are a couple. So one, they have a thirst for knowledge, so they generally tend to seek out knowledge and explore. I did want them to feel like they would be essentially make really great wizards or artificers, or even sorcerers as well. So that's kind of why I put the intelligence thing in there as well. And I said that they can either be incredibly outgoing, which definitely helps to be, an adventurer. And I wanted to, since they can, become this thing, they could, like, maybe their entire adventuring journey is about unbecoming this thing because they hate it. So they don't want to be an astral tiefling anymore, right? Or they want to learn how to potentially maybe embrace this power more, and learn to love it. So those were kind of the hooks that I just generally thought. And honestly, it could be cool. You could even have someone in your party that isn't an astral tiefling, but their end goal is to become an astral tiefling, because that's like their journey, and that's the goal that they have for themselves. So you could even have this not as a race that, or like a lineage that someone is currently playing, but it's something that they want to become. I definitely took inspiration from the lineages here, because I really like the idea of becoming something versus you being born into it. So, and now, so these are the characteristics. Chat, or my chadlings definitely helped me come up with these. So you can either roll a d8 or you can pick a few from here. So you have rings that float around your tail or horns, and whenever someone gets near you, it feels like the cold void of the astral sea. You have more fae-like features akin to elves or gith. The tips of your fingers or hair glow faintly. Your eyes are pitch black, but it looks like they contain stars. When you sleep, you hover slightly off the ground. You have stars or comet markings somewhere on your body, akin to tattoos. And when you feel a strong emotion, small starlights begin to dance around your body briefly. So, I think they're pretty fun. Yeah, and then I have this little funny thing down here about astral tieflings are like second step cousins to tieflings that you forgot existed until they showed up at the family reunion, because technically they're not actually tieflings. So and then I did have something akin. I left the met with mistrust thing that is on the normal tiefling page, because what I said is people are even more mistrusting of astral tieflings than infernal ones because they are so different. They have an air of mystery around them and are often stopped and questioned by local wizards and scholars for better or worse. Another interesting story hook is actually an astral tiefling that's could be on the run from a powerful mage that, maybe wants to like capture them and dissect them and do experiments on them, because they're kind of super outlandish like that. So that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. I don't want to mistrust, I guess, the same way in tieflings are mistrusted, just kind of like, you walk into a room and then there's just something that feels not like very kind of otherworldly, but also just a different sort of presence. It would kind of be the same sort of mistrust if you're just a commoner and then you walk into a bar and there's a fucking Gith Yankee. Like, what? Kind of that same vibe. That's the vibe I was going for. So, Astral Tieflings share physical commonalities with Tieflings, but are not actually related to them. So, telepathy. You can talk to a creature in your mind, and they can talk back to you as long as they share the same language and are within 30 feet. And you have to be able to see or hear this creature. And if you have any other abilities with telepathy, you can expand that reach by an additional 30 feet. I put that in there because it's very much hard. Telepathy in D&D is very weird. There are several different ways you can get it, but none of those ways really build off themselves. So I thought this would be an interesting feature to say if you wanted to play an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, which I think would be a very great fit for an Astral Tiefling. This would actually give you more uses of your telepathy and your abilities that make you feel special. Same with like a Far Realms Warlock, or if you have the telepathy feat. So I wanted to make this character have a very strong thematic feeling that could also be built on by other class choices or feats that usually aren't able to be built on in that way. So that's why I added that little blurb at the end. And so for ability score increases, I said generally intelligence increases by 2, and your charisma, constitution, or dexterity would increase by 1. But I did note here, like I described earlier, this is subject to change depending on how the Astral Tiefling was created. So this is what I did for the age, because I wasn't super sure about the age, but I thought it was kind of fitting because time is weird in the Astral Sea. So the age of the Astral Tiefling can vary depending on what they were or what race they were before and how much time they've spent in the Astral Sea. So on average, take the lifespan of the creature's previous race and multiply it by 10. The only time I think that really gets out of hand is for super long-lived races like elves, but I also think that makes it more interesting because then this might be something that elves in particular actively seek out because it would increase their lifespan a disgusting amount. Or even just humans. So I feel like, a lot of the short-lived or the long-lived races, this could be something that they do actively seek out, but it's a very hard thing to do. So, and then tieflings, I forgot to put the astral, but tieflings same size and build as humans, so you're medium size. Same walking speed as average, and then I did have astral resistance, so you do have resistance to psychic damage. I was also debating about potentially making them have resistance to force damage as well, but I wasn't sure because force damage is a very uncommon damage type a lot of the time, but I think that might be fun because initially, the first draft of this, I actually went in and I changed these things really recently. They did have dark vision, but then I realized most other races from the astral sea and the astral plane do not have dark vision other than the astral elves, but that's because every elf basically gets dark vision. So I was like, that's interesting. So I think it's an interesting concept to take a race where you actually lose your dark vision if you had dark vision before, if you were something else. So especially because most races from that plane of existence they don't have that trait. So I did decide to get rid of the dark vision. And then you do have psionics, which this is definitely inspired by the Gith Yankee and the Githzerai. But I kind of also wanted this race to be slightly similar to them, but also very, very different feeling. So I did kind of take the spells and this idea from them. So, the mage hand cantrip, and when you cast the spell, it is invisible, but something I thought was interesting is that I added, it has a slight magnetic pull. So this could be a boon, but it could also be really harmful if you're trying to be sneaky and all of a sudden there's a screw on the ground and it just lifts off the air and you're like, fuck, I can't, it won't come off. So I thought that could have some fun role play potential and just fun little moments. And then it also fits with the potential of the metal and the horns. So, And then starting at 3rd level, you can cast Shield with this trait, and then starting at 5th level, you can cast Spiritual Weapon with this. However, your weapon is not based off faith, but off the sheer power of your mind from spending so much time in the Astral Sea. So once you cast Shield or Spiritual Weapon with this trait, you can't cast the spell with it again until you finish the long rest. But you can use other spell slots you have of the appropriate level, and you can choose Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. And then for languages, just you can speak and read and write Common and one other rare language of your choice. I did note that it has to be a rare language, which I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know. I just think a rare language fits because a lot of the denizens of the Astral Sea definitely tend to speak more rare languages. So yeah, I might also add in there, you can keep, if you became this race and you did not choose it at character creation, you keep the languages that you had because that makes sense in my mind. But that's kind of how I did it. I think it's pretty balanced. There are definitely some changes I'm thinking about using, but I hope you guys really liked it. This has kind of been my overall general guide. Yeah, if you have more questions or if you want to see other videos like this, please let me know. I might put the chat questions if I have any in the YouTube video. I don't know if I will. But yeah, and this is a race available on D&D Beyond. You can use it, add it, subject to change. We'll see. Anyway, hope you enjoy.